Welcome to this week's Therapeutic Tuesday. And this week we have a follow-up session with Luci. I think Luci's was one of the first Therapeutic Tuesdays that we had. It's now 6 months since that original session. And Luci's made some significant progress that we'll talk about in the video. But we're now looking at having gone from having a kind of bodily reaction to doing activity. That's really calmed down. But there's still a kind of anticipatory kind of worry and anxiety in the mind. Like that voice that develops, which is fearful of us doing too much and kind of constantly analyzing to try and protect us from crashing or getting carried away. So talk about how to work with that inner voice in a way that's kind of helpful and useful, and also look at some pieces to help accelerate the healing path as well. So here's Luci. How are you doing?
Okay, thank you. How are you?
Very well. Nice to see you.
And you?
Thank you for your email, which I was just reading through. So, yeah, it sounds like there's been some progress since last time we spoke. Do you want to just talk me through it a bit more?
Okay, so there's definitely been some movement. I think probably typically for people in my position, there have been times when it feels like I've made big strides forward retrospectively, and other times when I feel like actually not that much is different in maybe my felt experience. I definitely, do you want me to go over a bit of what I said in the email?
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
So when we spoke, I said, I think rather optimistically in retrospect, we spoke in July, and so that was 6 months ago now. I thought I was probably at about 40% of health. In retrospect, I think that was optimistic, and I think I was probably more at about 35%, having not realised quite how limited I had been prior to that.
Yeah.
Now I would say quite confidently that I'm at about 50% of health, 6 months on from that point. And my day-to-day experience of illness and life has definitely changed to reflect that, in that at that time I was only just sort of starting to feel more like myself again. Every now and then I'd feel the spark of mental clarity and like the ability to do things, whereas now if I don't feel that, that's unusual.
Wow.
So that's really great. And with that's come the opportunity to be able to do not necessarily more than I was doing, but to do it more regularly, with the exception of social contact, which I've been able to extend. Like it still doesn't, I've probably had maybe 10 or 12 social interactions since that time, which in 6 months perhaps for a normal person isn't a lot, but actually what I've been capable of doing has grown significantly since then.
Okay. Firstly, I'm really pleased to hear of the progress, and
Thank you.
I know you've worked very, very hard for that progress. Just out of interest, what do you think have been the key ingredients behind that progress?
I think it has been very much a collaborative effort, and that all the things together have had to be there at the same time, because I don't think it's any one thing. I think initially the fact that I had a year to actually crash and rest for the first time in my life made the world of difference, because I've now got to the point where I feel sort of like I've spent a lot of my life feeling, and then had to jump straight back into going back to university or going back to school and having to start again and push through, even when because I've got to a stage where I could do things.
Yes.
But only at cost. So the things that have helped, I think, have been A, the time to rest, B, the ongoing effect of the psychology work, and which I think for me has definitely been ongoing, being able to understand how these things apply to myself on many different levels. And I find that even now I'm starting to recognize patterns, or like a certain underlying thing that pins everything else together. Any anxiety or pattern that I have all seems to come down to the same thing. And I think I've had the opportunity and the privilege to have that time to learn as much as I could. And like I mentioned in my email, I feel like now I have a really good understanding of how I came to be at this point, where all these different things have come from, be it physical or otherwise. For me, it's definitely been a case of no one thing causing me to be here. And again, no one thing helping me to get better, but the diet and the psychology and the routine and trying as best I can to calm down my nervous system and get good quality rest, but balance that with moving and exercising to a degree. It's been an
It's such a balancing act sometimes, right? Trying to
yeah.
figure out these pieces together. And do you feel like, in terms of your nervous system, do you feel like that when you're resting, that you feel like you're in a healing state? And do you feel like as you're starting to bounce the boundaries in the way that you have been, that you've been able to more often than not maintain that healing state?
Yes, not as much as I'd like to, because I'd like to do it
Sure.
all the time. But even in the last, it's definitely been really difficult. And especially once I started to bounce the boundaries, what we spoke about last time was having that neuroception, I think you called it, of this real felt experience of these things being bad ideas and dangerous, and your body quite clearly saying, no, I don't want to do this. And as I was able to do those things and not feel significantly worse for it, that really has lent to the confidence of feeling better and being able to at least rationally say, no, it's okay, to some extent. I have found of late that the nervous system way of the way it's like it's happening to me at the moment is I don't feel so wired in my body anymore. It's just my brain is busy.
Okay.
So that's definitely been a tip in the right direction.
Yes.
But my brain is still running a lot.
And is that well, firstly, that's really good that it sounds like your body is more calm, because I think there's nothing more frustrating than trying to rest and the body just kind of being wired the whole time. So the fact that you've managed to calm and to settle that, I think is awesome. In terms of your mind, is it that it's kind of calm when you practice meditations or your tools or relaxations, and then it's just very quick to being re-triggered? Or is even when you're calming that it's still kind of overactive?
So I'd say the former day to day when I've not got much going on, but if I've got something coming up, like if I know I'm seeing a friend, if I've got that coming up, and then again afterwards as my body's calming down, on either side of that it's continuous. So it's the latter.
So there's a kind of anticipatory kind of anxiety, might not be quite the right word, because you're not saying that you're necessarily worrying, but it sounds like there's an anticipatory kind of
Like
activation, let's say.
rather than a mental anxiety.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds like that is starting to calm as you're having more positive experiences. So as your body and your nervous system, and I think a lot of this is down to the fact that you're bouncing the boundaries really intelligently and carefully. So you're collecting, it sounds like, positive experiences rather than negative experiences. But it sounds like through doing it the way that you are, that is it that whereas, let's say you kind of bounce the boundary from here to here, and even though there might be anticipatory kind of anxiety or whatever, and it's stimulating, you're a bit more wired afterwards because you don't crash, the next time you make that stretch, it feels a bit easier. Is that right?
Definitely. And I have, for probably the first time in my life, done it in that way, and it has just been a complete guessing game. I don't feel like I have it down at all. I'm still worried about getting it wrong.
You'll have it completely mastered by the time you got to the other side of this chapter. So.
For the first time in my life, I feel like I've come out after the Christmas period feeling like I did more than I possibly could have hoped to have done without feeling significantly worse for it. And I never normally have it that way around. It's normally like, oh, I think I could stretch to do this. And then the other side is way downhill.
Yeah, it's a really nice thing when you get used to kind of being over optimistic to realize that you're actually becoming overly cautious. It's a sign, I think, of a shift of attitude and perception, but it's also a sign that your recovery and your healing path has got enough momentum that it's almost ahead of your expectation, which is really great. Say a bit about where it feels like the challenges are at this point. So in terms of where hopefully I can be helpful in the time that we've got.
Well, at this point, as I mentioned in my email, having got to do this bit more, it just makes me want to do everything. But I'm impatient now to get on with my life, essentially. I feel like I want to start my life. And that's how I feel on one side. And then on the other side, I have this like very deep-rooted fear, I think, of not feeling safe in doing so, of being so scared of overstepping because of all those experiences I have had of bouncing too far or pushing too hard. running before I can walk. I feel like I've lost my inner critic and gained an inner paranoid parent that's called, like, oh, don't go that high in the tree, don't go near that dog, be careful about this, if that makes sense. And so I want to accelerate my progress without being reckless, and also kind of address that underlying fear, which I think everything kind of comes back to for me. All these like achiever patterns, perfectionist patterns, are attempts to control the things in the world and what's going on, such that I don't get more sick, and such that I can deal with everything. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of what's challenging is your system has learned that when you didn't have that inner paranoid parent, which by the way, I love the name of that, that when you didn't have that, the danger was that you kept trying to do too much too quickly. And as you said a little bit earlier, that as soon as you felt a little bit better, you immediately tried to kind of act as though things were normal or kind of close to. So that part of you is completely reasonably trying to protect you. And it's almost like the more you've made progress doing things the way that you are now, the more cautious that part becomes. It's like there's, when we feel shit most of the time, of course we have to learn to kind of pace and listen because we're trying to avoid feeling shit. But it's like, well, if I feel shit already, so if I go and do this thing, yeah, I'm going to feel even more shit afterwards, but it's just on levels of shitness. Do I really care? And then when we start to feel real progress, we suddenly get this real sense of wanting to protect that progress that we've made. It's like, it's almost like someone it's not a perfect analogy as I think about it, but it's almost like someone that's been alone for a long time and then suddenly starts to get a good friendship. And it's like, I can imagine like a young child at school. I've got like my eldest daughter's 8.5, and I can imagine if she went to a new school and she didn't have any friends, she had a really tough few weeks, and then she made a friend. It's like that friend would be the most precious thing in the world in terms of wanting to protect that. And it's like that, I think, when we suddenly, the progress is not, we're tricking ourselves to try and pretend it's better, which I think is what can often happen, is we look back and we go, we try to find the evidence that things are a little bit better than they were before. But when that evidence becomes undeniable, it's like, it's something that we really want to protect. And so that part of us almost becomes all the more ferocious in terms of its protection. And there is an argument to be made of leave this completely alone because it's working, and there's a kind of a part in me, which is that I'm always looking at, I've talked about this model a few times before, but it's like, if someone's crashing, how do you stabilize and how do you build a foundation? And then how do you get progress? And then it's like, how do you protect the progress that's there? And what people tend to do is when they start to get progress, they immediately go to, how do I accelerate the progress? And I think it's a mistake, because what happens is it starts to get better, then we try and push it too hard and it crashes down. And if we can protect what's there and build that as a solid foundation, and then we can accelerate from there. So I think part of the way to come at this is to really understand that inner paranoid parent, rather than seeing that as something to be kind of go to war with, or see it as something to be kind of terrified and fearful of. It's how do you work collaboratively as that, with that. And I say this partly at this point as well, having gone from, I'm not so far, I'm a middle-aged man now, but I'm not so far away from remembering that feeling of being rebelling against parent to finding myself in the role of parent with a whole new understanding of what a paranoid parent actually feels like. But it's like, how do you find that way to collaborate with that part of you, rather than to see it as something that's either you're afraid of or you're frustrated? Because what can happen is that we go from being a super compliant, listening, and then we get more and more frustrated to the point that we just kind of go, fuck it. And then we just we go crazy, and then it all starts to unravel. So I'm curious as to that inner paranoid parent. How do you experience it? Like, whereabouts in, like, is it a kind of voice inside of you, which by the way doesn't make you crazy, we all do it? Is it a feeling? Like, how do you experience that part of you?
I think it's almost analogous to your description of the ME goggles. I feel like, I don't know if you remember taking your provisional, well, if you took your driving theory test and
Yeah.
then you do a risk assessment where you watch a screen and you have to click as soon as you see the hazard. It's like I see the whole world like that. I'm just constantly looking for hazards, and it's like I've got these goggles on. And although I might be pottering along and having a nice time, in the background, there's this not even necessarily conscious voice saying, or best be checking the time. Have you been? Has this been going on for too long? Do you like, for example, if I'm out doing something, which isn't now unheard of, um, it's a sort of, it's like a clock ticking in the back of my mind, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. It's like a kind of constant risk assessing,
Yeah,
kind of, it's a little bit like when I walk into the training room and someone's left cables out and heaters, and I suddenly go into panic of like someone's going to have an accident. It's going to be a whole thing. So I totally get that. I guess I'm wondering, when that happens, what happens in your nervous system? Like, how do you feel, kind of nervous system wise, but also how do you feel emotionally? What's the emotional reaction or response to that?
the emotional reaction is definitely one of overwhelm. I start to feel, I think in general, aware of all these different things, that even when they're helpful things or just little things which shouldn't feel overwhelming at all, of all these things that I need to do to control. I think it comes back to that. And it's the same with, I then start to overthink, and not necessarily ruminating, but going over things or planning or even just daydreaming. And of late, as I say, it's not so physical in my nervous system, it's now in my, it's sort of in the way that my brain is thinking.
Yeah.
Up until maybe the last month, I could also feel it in my nervous system, as if I was shaking but not shaking.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So just to break it down a bit more then, so you're looking for the potential things that might go wrong. So let's actually take a real world example. So is there a recent time that comes to mind when this happened, like where either a social event or a thing that was happening?
Well, I can think of two. So let me tell you one, and if that's not working for you, say. So I was well enough to go and do something for New Year's Eve for the first time since 2011.
That's great.
So I went and did that, and then the last 2 weeks I've been doing almost surprisingly okay. And so I feel like I'm kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and conscious that I'm treading a fine line here. I don't want to go and do anything additional that might just tip me over the edge. But I also don't want to do nothing and set myself back if actually I'm okay and I could be going out trying to build up on this or that.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, that's great. So you've had a positive experience, and I'm guessing there was probably some anticipatory anxiety before, and you were wired during and wired after, or not?
Not as much as I expected. I dealt with it a lot better than I anticipated. Not that I didn't really think about it, I just did it.
And why do you think that was?
I think because a couple of weeks previously I had seen the same people for dinner, again, which was a big deal for me. This was the first time I'd seen them for a long time, and it was the first time I'd travelled somewhere and had an evening and stayed up late. And I had been incredibly nervous before that, and then I found it really hard to sleep after, but actually I was okay after that. And I think that had given me the confidence to be like, it's fine. And normally what I get most nervous about when seeing my friends is having to explain to them what I'm doing and what my illness is, etc. And I think I've just become a lot more relaxed about that, and they've been able to express it to them better, and they're very accepting and understanding. So none of that was an element of anxiety for me. I just felt like I was safe with them. I could do it. It was just around the corner from my house, so if I needed to come home I could. There was lots of like crutches, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful. So what it sounds like is happening is something is coming up, and your brain is thinking all of the things that might go wrong. Like, what if this happens? What if that happens? And it's like you're thinking your way to a feeling of safety and okayness. So it's like, if I think about all the things that might go wrong, I know all the things that I would do in all of those scenarios. If I get tired, I can come home. If it gets too late, so you figure out all of that. And it's almost like if you can go through that whole process, which is quite stimulating and quite tiring, then there's a feeling of, okay, I think it's safe, I think it's going to be okay. And then your system can relax. And it sounds like before, with that sort of neuroception response, that when you were going through that process, your nervous system was activating as well. And that's happening less in your body, which is a great sign of progress. But it sounds like there's still a sense of being overstimulated and kind of getting wired, and that also seen in the kind of not sleeping perhaps afterwards. So, and then that happens, and it sounds like there's less of a reaction against that than there was, because it's not as bad as it was. But it sounds like there is still a part of you which is becoming irritated by that process. So say a bit about that.
I think that's true. Even so, you told me a couple of days ago that we could speak, and since then, despite my best efforts, I've still been constantly thinking of questions that you might ask me that I can not prepare response for, but think about what I might want to say so that I can make the most of this opportunity. I have this, so it's not even always looking for things that can go wrong. It's just preparing, period.
Yeah.
And it very much it is in my head, I think.
Yeah.
That
if you were to give a name to that part of you, that's kind of anticipating, wants you to be prepared, wants you to be safe, wants to protect you. If you were to give a name to that part of you, what would you call it? That's probably a question you weren't prepared for as well.
I feel like going back to the driving instructor, it's kind of like having a driving instructor that's trying to prepare you for a test.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a driving instructor.
It's good. So it's like, it's the kind of inner driving instructor that wants to make sure that you're prepared. Yeah. And that inner driving instructor's not bad. It's not like a kind of evil, dark, bad kind of part. In fact, a good driving instructor is what avoids us killing ourselves on the road. Like it's a good thing. And if you spend the whole time driving constantly in panic of what might happen, that just becomes a really tiring way to drive a car. So when that happens, so one of the phrases that I use a lot is, if you can see it, you don't have to be it. And I'm sure you've probably heard me say that in multiple places, but if you can see that that's what's happening. So, it's my inner driving instructor. It's that part of me that wants to protect me from something bad happening. If you can lighten the mood a little bit and kind of see it as that, what happens is you're going from looking at the world kind of through those glasses. So those glasses might still be there and kind of drifting in and out, but you're not so trapped and so tight to that. And, I think it would be very unhelpful to take away this part of you right now. Mm-hmm. As much as at times, I think it's getting a bit too carried away, and sometimes the strategy is not the most helpful strategy. The principle of making sure that you're not stepping back into an old pattern of trying to do too much too quickly, getting carried away, going, oh, well, I went to dinner with friends and a few weeks later I went out for New Year's. Right, I'm going to start booking stuff in every weekend, and which will be a completely reasonable thing to want to do. But when you've worked so hard to go from 30 to 35% to 50% with wind in your sails, because I would say also, and it sounds like in the last 6 months, it's not just that you've kind of managed to drag yourself from 30 to 35 to 50. It feels like you've got some real momentum, which means that you're also well on the way to the next stages of the recovery process. So that is something to want to protect. Like, I feel protective for you as I hear how hard you've worked to make that progress. And it's not just the last 6 months, it's the 6-12 months prior to that as well that's gone in to get to this point. We want to make really sure that nothing happens that sabotages this. And so we can talk in a minute in terms of the accelerating, but in terms of the protecting, I think we want to lighten the grip of that kind of inner driving instructor. We want to add in a little bit of lightness, a little bit of kind of humor, the ability to go, hang on, I can see what my brain's doing. I've probably done enough of that. I've made my checks. It's a little bit like I've got in the car, I've set my mirrors, I'm about to pull out. I know there's no enormous truck that's coming flying down the road. I can now just pull out and drive off, as opposed to kind of constantly checking in fear the whole time. So it's then establishing a more healthy relationship to that part inside of you. And for what it's worth, if that part had been there, right at the start of your healing process, you probably would have shortcut your process significantly. And that's part of the kind of emotional hook, because you know that. I'm not saying something you don't know, that hook is also, oh my God, if I don't do this, my whole life's gonna fall apart. And there is absolutely a place in the healing journey where we work quite hard to calm this voice, because in a sense, it almost, the breakthrough at one stage becomes the limitation at the next stage. And this voice is part of what's helped you stabilize, and it's part of what helped you make progress. We want to loosen the grip, but we're not ready to completely let go. We still need some of that to just make sure that things stay on track.
That makes sense. I actually have an experience of feeling exactly like that in the past. Whenever I would go into my university exams, people would always be sat around me, people would stay up late at night revising, and I would stop at 5 o'clock, and then the next day you'd go to the exam and everyone sat there with their books or listening to music, and I'd just sit there deliberately trying as much as I can not to think about all the things that I was going to write in the exam, because I knew that I'd already put in all the hard work, and actually I just was having faith in the fact that when I sat down and looked at the paper, then I would know what to say, rather than spending that energy going over it for hours beforehand.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. It just reminds me that my first 2 years at university, my first year I crashed so badly because I wasn't prepared. My second year, I did no work nearly all year, and then I crammed and I was really kind of wired. My third year, I was so prepared. I spent the 3 weeks for my finals reading Harry Potter. It was just like, I'm done, I'm prepared. And there's something I think about that, knowing that you have prepared. It's like sports people, and a lot of the work in sports performance is not actually how to perform better when cycling or playing tennis. It's how to be more effective in recovery. And so it's like, when you don't need to be revising, letting your system settle means you're going to go in and you're going to be sharper in terms of the actual time. In terms of, so that's, I think, the piece in terms of protecting. I think it's identifying and recognizing that voice. It's not making it wrong, but it's holding a little bit lighter. And each time you see it, it's like, it's my inner driving instructor. It's trying to protect me. It's trying to keep me safe, and just holding that a bit more lightly. In terms of acceleration, I think where you are is absolutely the place where you can bounce boundaries, and you're clearly seeing the benefit of that. I think having safety nets after you do things is really helpful at this point. As much the part of you is going to want to just go, oh my God, I'm getting away with it, I just want to start doing more. Taking 20% longer over the next kind of stage of the recovery process is a lot better than potentially going faster, but the whole thing collapsing and falling back 2, 3, 4 months. What I think will help you in terms of bouncing the boundaries is, at this point, it's often quite helpful to keep a good record, and you're probably already doing this in terms of what you're doing, and just kind of really tracking what's giving you energy, what's draining energy, what your recovery time is. It's really good at this point, and this sounds like a really counterintuitive thing to say, but it's a really good thing at this point to have a few mini crashes from time to time. And what I mean by mini crashes, you do too much, but it takes like 2, 3, maximum 4 days to bounce back to baseline. Because if you don't have any mini crashes, there's an argument you're playing a little bit too safe. So if you do have a point you do too much, that is okay. You don't have to freak out and panic about it. It's how you kind of go, okay, that was a boundary that I hit. It may be that boundary's not there a month later or 2 months later, but at least at that point, you know where that boundary is. So the kind of accelerating is letting yourself take some risks, letting yourself have a few mini crashes, and totally being fine with that happening. I think you're starting to enter the point where being around other people historically was very tiring and very draining. And I think you're starting to get to the point where you can be in a healing state and if anything, energized by, perhaps a little bit over buzzy and stimulated, but energized by being around people. And then it sort of moves from everything being an equal kind of, that takes that much energy, that takes that much energy, that's draining in that way, to actually things can actually, they can actually give you energy. It's not as simple as how much activity you do is always a negative spend of energy. That being around people can be emotionally supportive, it can be make you feel positive, something you look forward to. And actually you find that just like we go on downward kind of spirals, that you spend a bit more time around people, you feel better in yourself, you might be a bit buzzy the night after, but then you sleep more deeply, you feel more optimistic, you do a bit more, and actually you start to notice that it feeds itself in a positive way.
Okay, that sounds good.
Any questions you've got at this point?
Let me consult my list.
Sure.
Do you have any advice? So when I have my head going very busy, for example, thinking of things to say to you, I can hear you saying, try and be in your body and listen to your body when you're trying to decide whether to do things. How do you have any advice for how to actually do that? What does being in your body feel like? Because I try, so I'm thinking, and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to pay attention to my hands and my feet now. And then I do that for a bit, and then back we are thinking again.
Yeah.
So that's kind of two different things. Sorry. So there's that, and then there's how do I listen to my body? Because there have been so many times over the past month where I'm like, oh, I feel like it might be a good idea if I go and walk around the garden for 5 minutes, but I don't know if that's too much.
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually it feeds back something you were mentioned in your email as well around food, where you were saying that part of me is craving sugar, but how much of that is kind of bad bacteria craving sugar, and how much is that actually I just want to have a piece of cake, for example. Quite your words, but so here's the challenge. I make it sound, I think, unreasonably easy when I say listen to your body, because it's a little bit like saying you're going to be in a meeting with one person, or maybe meeting with 10 people all saying the same thing. But the body is a little bit like an out of a badly rehearsed orchestra, where you've got all these different parts kind of communicating different things at the same time, and it doesn't line up and it doesn't make sense. And that's where the real mastery comes in, of deciphering different types of tiredness. I don't just mean in the kind of 4 types of tiredness model, but I mean like for example, oh, that's the tiredness I get when I've done too much and I'm wired. This is the tiredness I get when I've not done enough and I'm wired. And they're both wired, but one means I need to do more activity and one means do less activity. And that difference can be very subtle, to the kind of sense of, actually, I feel really drained, but I'm environmentally tired. And if I go and change the environment and go and be outside, actually, it's going to lift my energy. Or I'm physically so tired that actually I just need anything that's going to calm and rest my body. So it's learning to decipher those different messages and those different communications. And the problem is that those communications for you are going to be different to those communications for somebody else. And so there isn't really a manual that helps you do that. But I do think being willing to take some risks at this point is quite helpful. Where you were before, your tolerance for getting it wrong was quite small, and so a risk could mean a month of recovery time. I think at this point, if you're not sure, the best thing to, as long as the kind of, if I go and it's too much, or I don't go and I didn't do enough, probably the price of each of those is small. So be willing to take some risks, and then you're going to learn from the experience of doing that. And you'll get it much clearer, and then it will be highly irritating, because you'll go the next stage of the recovery process and the communications will all start to change again. And that's where the practice of listening, deciphering, making sense of, tracking back and comparing. And it also goes back to, that's why I'm also saying, let's not take away the inner paranoid parent, because that is part of the process, or the driving instructor that's kind of checking out of, well, I felt this way last time, I feel that way now, and I think it's the same. And last time, that can help me track where I was then to where I am now. So learning to make sense of and decipher all of that is quite tricky, but getting good at that will serve you very, very well on the other side of this whole process, because you get good at listening to your body. And then you can start to, one of the things that of course cause people to get sick in the first place is not listening. You have to get really, really good, like Olympic class good at listening to support the recovery process. But then you have that skill on the other side.
And the only way to do that is by collecting evidence.
That's right. And that's where you're at a stage now where you can make mistakes, and that's okay. But I'm encouraging you to make some mistakes, because that's how you're going to get information.
Good to know. Great.
Any other questions you've got for now?
I don't think so, unless you have any advice on specifically quietening my mind beyond trying to be in my body.
Yeah, the other thing I would say at this point, obviously you're doing things like guided meditations and relaxations and that sort of thing. As you've got a bit more energy, moving your body will really help. So increasing things like yoga, if you're doing some yoga practice, gentle walking, things that it gets much easier to get in your body as you move your body. So any kind of mindful movements will really help with that.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
So you're at the stage where you can start to, again, bounce the boundaries around that as well.
Okay, that's exciting and scary.
Yeah, I often think this is quite a frustrating part of the recovery process because you're kind of in between two worlds. You're not the kind of in the world where you're just kind of feeling terrible having to rest all the time, but you can't yet take the brakes off and just fully enjoy life. So it's kind of quite a frustrating stage. But it's also a very exciting stage because you start to get the experience of like going out on New Year's Eve for the first time in many years. Like it's a very sweet stage in that sense. So as much as it's easy to focus on the frustrations, really try and enjoy those moments because they are very precious.
Yeah, that's something I've been very conscious of. Every time I find myself out, I look around and I'm like, wow, I couldn't have done this before. I feel very lucky.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really great. Thanks, Luci, for being willing to share your story again, and also excited to have you on the practitioner course as well. So I look forward to connecting with you in that way. And yeah, keep me in the loop. Perhaps we'll do another session in 6 months or at some point between now and then. It's nice. I think, well, we've done a few follow-ups with people. People have really liked tracking people's journeys. So I really appreciate you being willing to share again.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Great to chat. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope you found that session helpful. Do check out Luci's original Therapeutic Tuesday, which was called Progressing Without Crashing, I think, something like that. And yeah, do share your thoughts in the comments about what you found helpful, your reflections from the session. I'm really keen to hear your experience and your thoughts. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel on YouTube, please do. It helps make sure that you see the videos each day as they're released. It also helps tell YouTube that people like this channel, and it means more people will see the videos. Do also like the video as well. Tomorrow it's Wellness Wednesday, and we have the second in our 3-part series with Kirsty Cullen exploring adrenal weakness and fatigue in chronic fatigue. We'll be talking about signs and symptoms of suboptimal adrenal function. So look forward to talking with you tomorrow.